All right, everybody, welcome to the show. This is the Otherppl podcast, a weekly program featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I am Brad Listi, I'm your host, and I'm in Los Angeles. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing all right. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, and Bluesky. So I'm going to be doing a Craftwork episode today. Craftwork episodes, for those of you who might be new to the show, feature conversations about particular aspects of the craft of writing, or they feature conversations about the business of publishing. And today it will be the latter. I am going to be talking about how to launch a book with Leah Paulos, founder and director of publicity at Press Shop PR. That is her boutique PR agency. It offers independent book publicity campaigns to authors and publishers. Over the years, Leah and her team at Press Shop have helped authors gain national coverage in a wide variety of major publications and media venues, including the New York Times, the Today Show, the Daily Show, the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the New Yorker magazine, CNN, and the BBC, just to name a few. And in March of 2023, Leah launched a new venture called Book Publicity School, and did so in an effort to bring Press Shop's expertise and guidance to more authors at an affordable price. Book Publicity School offers workshops, coaching, and online groups to offer transparency into the publishing industry's pretty opaque promotional processes, and to help authors advocate for their own work as effectively as possible in the modern media environment. I had a very good conversation with Leah Paulos about how to launch a book. That is coming up. So a quick reminder that I do a weekly email newsletter. I write a weekly email newsletter. I would love it if you would subscribe over at Substack. And if you are a regular listener of this show, if you tune in week after week, I hope you will join the Otherppl Patreon community and help me keep doing this work. Keep making this show. You can do so over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Today's episode is brought to you by MCD Books, publisher of Absolution, the new novel by Jeff Vandermeer, and the surprise fourth installment in his very popular Southern Reach series. I will be in conversation with Jeff Vandermeer soon. Absolution is the official November pick of my book club, the Otherppl Book Club. To learn more about the book club and to sign up, just visit the show's official website, otherppl.com. Again, the book is called Absolution, the new novel by Jeff Vandermeer. It is available from MCD Books. All right, so let's get to today's main event, my conversation with Leah Paulos, founder of Press Shop PR and Book Publicity School, all about how to launch a book, which I think will be of interest to a great many of you. It's a bit of a mysterious art form, is it not? And it's always nice to be able to talk to experts who live on that side of the equation and who do that work on a daily basis. So here we go. This is my conversation with Leah Paulos.
Any type of book promotion comes down to finding your readers, finding your potential readers, and telling them, getting them to want to read your book. So then every bit of promotion, no matter what it is, if it's media focused, if it's event focused, if it's platform and community building focused, social media focused, it falls into that general rubric. You have to figure out who your target reader is. And then what is the message? What is the way that you are going to present your book that's compelling to them?
So how do you find out who your target audience is? I mean, I can kind of intuit it, but are there methods that you recommend?
So I think there's a lot of things to think about. First of all, you have to figure out one of the best ways to start, I should say, is by looking at other books that have a similar audience in some way. So if you think about, say, your book is an environmental memoir, so then you can look at some books that have come out recently in the environmental space and look at where they got traction. And then you can look at some books that are more in the memoir space and see if any of the places that they got traction for those books would be also a good target for you because they would cover it more from a memoir point of view. So that's always a really good thing to start with, especially for authors who don't really know where to start. Doing that comp title research is incredibly effective for a number of reasons. One is that it sort of takes it out of the abstract. It can be so hard when an author is first starting to promote a book and they think, oh, God, there are a million things I could do. Media is all over the place. What should I focus on? So finding those books that have some similarities to you is a really good way to create a concrete roadmap. Because then you're like, okay, this book was sort of in my space. It did pretty well. I'd love to get that kind of attention. Okay, let's look at what happened. Had a trade review. It had a feature in the local paper. They did 2 book festivals, 6 podcasts, a local NPR. They had a website and they were tweeting, or they were on X. So it just sort of allows you to see, okay, I heard about this book. This is what kind of a launch I would love to emulate for my book campaign to emulate. And this is what it was. So that's always a really good thing to do to start.
So when it comes to a book, quote unquote, getting traction, some of this is just gleaned from your experience of, I think, being online, where you're watching media coverage of books and you might see the same book talked about in multiple venues. But are there other, like, more like analytical or concrete or mathematical ways that you're evaluating traction? Like, are you looking at book scan numbers? Are you looking at, it's got to come down to book sales, right? Like, is there a way to measure that an author can take advantage of so they can see what is actually landing?
So it can be hard to do. I mean, your publisher, if you're with a traditional publisher, you can ask your editor. Sometimes they'll, be able to look at the book scan numbers for you, or your agent. Of course, everybody looks at the Amazon numbers, which are an imperfect way to measure it, but they give some indication. You can sometimes see the traction on social media, visits to your website. I think that in this environment, it's changing so quickly. It has been changing so quickly for so long. So, and I think it's just going to speed up. The rate of change is just going to speed up with AI and all of the disruptions in everything. So, I always think that an author, for one thing, should be really clear when they are starting out their promotion for their book. They should be clear with themselves what the goal is, because that's going to inform how you promote your book. So book sales, of course, are going to be a part of that goal for almost every author. But also, there are a lot of people that come both to Press Shop or to Book Publicity School. That's usually one of a couple factors. It might be that they're really trying to lay the groundwork for their future, for their next book. They might want to get an agent for their next book. If they don't have one, they might want to get a bigger publisher or a bigger advance for their next book. Sometimes it's that they want to sort of get more name recognition. They want to talk about their book. If it's issue oriented, they want to spread the word and share their ideas. So I think that's always one thing that's really good to think about at the beginning of any campaign, because it's going to inform what you do. If it's only book sales, you might really focus on the really big hits. But no matter what your goals are, you do want to take advantage of one of the benefits of the media environment these days. There are many downsides to the media environment these days. One upside is that there are a lot of opportunities for niche audiences, to find your niche and to really find a pretty drilled down community that you can market your book to. So whereas, 15 years ago, there were so many more opportunities for book reviews. Terrible that it's not the case anymore. It's not. But there are a lot of targeted podcasts that might not have a huge audience. Maybe they have, 500 downloads per episode, whatever it is. But if those 500 people are incredibly invested in your space, that can be great. So I think no matter what you do, vis-a-vis what your goals are, you do always want to be paying attention to those sort of niche, siloed, taking advantage of the fact that does wreak a lot of havoc in the world, but we are in our siloed media. So if you can tap into that, it can be incredibly effective.
So if you are an author, let's say I'm an author and I've got a book and I get a book deal, and publication schedules it's usually like a year out from acquisition to publication. That's broadly speaking the way that it goes. At what point in the process do you recommend that an author begin to do work on promotion?
I always think the sooner the better, because especially if you are going to be doing it yourself. There are many different things that go into a successful campaign. One of them is time. It's a time consuming endeavor. So if you have more time, great. Maybe you can start with a year out, just at least doing that research, starting with that comp title research, looking for people that can cover your book. If it's fiction, maybe you can come up with a pitch for yourself that's sort of about craft of writing or something that you can pitch to this category. And doing that research, it takes time. You have to sit down and go down a bunch of rabbit holes online. So the sooner the better, so that you can pace yourself. You can say, all right, I'm going to spend an hour, every Tuesday and every Thursday doing this research. So I think you really want to be ready to get going and doing outreach in the 4, 5, 6 months before publication. And in order to get ready, you want to be building out those contact lists, those brainstorm lists. You want to be thinking about how you're going to be positioning your book, what you're gonna, what kind of pitch you're gonna write about your book. How are you going to, when you email, even if it's the local bookstore, if you email the event coordinator at your local bookstore, you want to have it be casual and say, tell them the things that they want to know, which is you're going to get a big crowd. But you need to find a way to present your book in a way that's really compelling and makes people want to read it.
How do you do that? Because these kinds of emails torture me, where it's like I've got to pitch myself, I've got to encapsulate this book, which took me like years and years to write and is however many hundreds of pages long. And then it's like all riding on some email where you break it down in a paragraph. What do you suggest to writers?
Yeah, so a number of things. I think you need to keep in mind with a pitch, and this is especially hard to do when it's an author writing their own pitch, is the pitch does not need to be a comprehensive look at the book. You do not need to get into the entirety, the breadth, and all of the nuance. The job of the pitch is to do one thing, which is to make people want to read the book and consider your ask. So, if there's one thread in it that is the easiest to explain, that people really respond to, go for that. So that's one thing. Another thing is I think you really want to think about what resonates when you talk to people about your book. When you're an author and you've written a book, you've spent, years with it, maybe decades. All of it, its twists and turns, and it's in your head. It's a very solitary endeavor, writing. So when you're pitching, you have to get out of that headspace. You have to get into the headspace of how can I make what's in my head and what I know about my book accessible and interesting to other people. So you want to talk about it with people that you think might be good sort of general target readers and see how you present it. So if you start talking about your book and somebody, you tell a little anecdote and somebody's eyes like light up and, oh my god, that sounds amazing, I want to read it. Hey, like make a mental note to yourself. Maybe that's a good angle. If likewise, if you tell the origin story of your book and everyone's kind of like, okay, what time is it or whatever, that's not resonating. Maybe you nix that as part of your book pitch and what you say on interviews, for example. So that's one thing. I also think that this is one thing we always tell authors in our workshops is, when you're writing a pitch about your book, don't do it. This is just a small little pivot that is helpful. Don't do it in whatever format you were writing your book. So if you were writing in Scrivener or Google Docs, don't open up another document there because it just puts you in that same headspace. Rather, open up an email and think of a person that you are writing to, just to, again, give you that little shift where you are thinking about an audience. You are speaking to somebody and trying to make it interesting to that person. So, those are some things you can do. There's no doubt about it that figuring out how to pitch your book is hard. You want to, keep in mind or have a look. I mean, and this is another thing you can do is, if there are other books that are somewhat similar and you can look at their media coverage, sometimes like a headline will jog something in your brain. Because if you think about what a headline is, it's a story, it's a hook usually. So maybe that will give you an idea. You want to keep the ideas coming because it's really easy for authors to get in a little rut about how they're describing their book. So you want to get some outside different ways of using language to describe your book.
Some people are better at it than others. I have friends who are really good at like pitching and like they have the art of the email down, like they can adopt this casual voice and they just sort of know how to talk to get people to do what they want. And
Yeah.
I'm also a person who gets a lot of pitches.
Right.
I'm getting pitched all day long. And what I often will say is like the shorter, the better. And the more like casual, personal, the better. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you're on the receiving end, I think it's worth understanding this, that, if you're a writer and you're trying to pitch media outlets or bookstores, these are people who, generally speaking, get pitched quite a lot. So their inboxes are filled with pitches.
Right.
And most of these pitches are really long and they are copied and pasted or sent out in batches. And I get the utility of that. I understand that you can't sit there and write a super special email to each person, personalizing things. It's just not practical. But the problem is that when you have 50 of these coming at you a day and each email is like 3,000 words long, that's a lot of work for me. And
Right.
so when somebody emails me, like a publicist emails me and they're like, hey, I like your show. I've listened to it. And you can tell when someone's bullshitting you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But when someone's like, you don't have to listen to every episode, but they're at least familiar with it.
Right.
And they're like, hey, I like your show. I think I have a great author for you. Like, can I send you a copy? That email alone, like just that, is
Mm-hmm.
likely to get me to respond rather than like the 3,000 word
Yeah.
synopsis and the author bio and all the blurbs. It's like those just feel generic to me at a certain point.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think no matter what, you have to think about how things are going to land. And that, like, to your point, that you're getting a million pitches a day, almost every journalist, they are getting tons and tons of pitches. And so, yeah, you don't have the time to, you have to get their interest within a couple seconds because otherwise they're just going to look at the next one. So everything has to be really tight, really short, and yeah, positioned to whoever it is that you're actually pitching, like a real person
Yeah.
receiving a real email.
And I mean, like, I think like being familiar with the publication that you're pitching, being familiar, at least in a general sense, with whatever bookstore, whoever it is, like if you take even just a little bit of time to understand
Mhm.
what that person or bookstore or magazine is actually doing, you can tailor, I think, your pitch to that, and showing a little bit of just respect, I think, is a good idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, in your experience, I guess authors do this sometimes, but I feel like it's probably a situation where you're not going to have a high rate of success if you're an author and you yourself are trying to pitch like magazines and newspapers to cover you and cover your book. I feel like these kinds of places tend to be more receptive when it comes from a publicist. And so I'm saying that, I think that's probably obvious. The question I would add to it is, it's not a good idea to like make up a fake name and get an email address and send out. Because some people can't afford a publicist. And so they're
Yeah.
sitting there at home and they're like, well, I could become like Joe Smith, the publicist, and send these out on behalf of myself
Right.
and then field the responses. Like, I bet you there are some authors who have done that.
I'm quite sure there are. I mean, I would say that, yes, there are absolutely places like, the cable news or national NPR, the Times Book Review that, yeah, authors are not going to get traction. They shouldn't be pitching them themselves. I would say that in general, especially in this news environment where there's so many different places, and a lot of the people that have Substacks or have podcasts or have any of these other types of digital native media outlets, a lot of them are much more open to having an email from an author than you would think. And that's true on the local level. If you reach out to your local NPR and say like, hey, I've been listening to WPR, blah, 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 forever. I've absolutely seen producers be totally fine with that. I think a big part of it is, if you do that, you need to make sure it's professional. You're giving them all the information that they need. It's clear that you sort of know a little bit about how it works. I think one of the things that, if you put yourselves in the place of a producer, for example, and you get an author email, your job as a producer is not only to find stories or for good interview subjects, but also just to know that this is somebody that's going to be professional to work with, that all the information that I need is there, because on some level, it's about making it easy for them. If they have to go and say, well, when is it coming out? And wait, who was the publisher? You didn't include that. And are you media trained? That can be a disincentive to them booking you. But I think in this environment where there's so many outlets like that, it's totally fine for authors to do it themselves. Would it be better if a publicist did it? Maybe. And certainly for those big venues, or for, Vanity Fair, the New Yorker, sure. But I think people are more open than you would think to getting an email, as long as it's personalized and it's sharing a good story. They're looking for stories. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for great content, interviews, stories for their audience. That's what they're looking for. And if you can give them that, great.
Yeah, it's hard. I think it's easier if you're trying to promote a memoir or a work of nonfiction than it is if you're working with a novel and you're trying to get somebody to make a story out of that, because the story is fictional.
Right.
It has less of an obvious hook. I mean, it's like a book review or an author interview.
Yeah.
That's sort of what you've got as an author of fiction.
Yeah.
And I think squeaky wheel gets the grease. I think if you don't have any resources otherwise, and it's just on you, you don't know until you try. There's no harm in giving it a shot.
There is no harm in giving it a shot at all. I think there's a lot of fear of like, oh, is this, are people going to think this is stupid? Or they're going to be like, why is this author writing to me? So what? What harm does that do you if somebody really, thinks like, well, I can't believe this author is emailing me and they want me on the podcast? They're not going to think that. The most they're going to think is, let me see what's in the next email. Archive.
That's right.
Nobody even is thinking about, anything to that effect. And if they are, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, they'll forget about it in about 5 minutes. So just to review, we've got like an author working on his or her own would be looking at comp titles, trying to find other books that have had good launches and that have gotten some traction, and just like getting a list of those going. And then maybe creating a spreadsheet and coming up with a list of magazines, newspapers, websites, any kind of digital publication that might be amenable. And then podcasts are a good one, because there's more and more every day. And, all of these things, like you say, are niche-y, and you can hopefully find like a more hyper-targeted audience, even if it's not like that big, huge national audience, which
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's like less and less the case that even exists. I feel like everything is just
Mm-hmm.
almost everything is niche these days, except for
Yeah.
like Taylor Swift and Beyonce.
Yeah.
So when you're in that kind of media environment and everything is really fractalized, like how do you break through? I think that's the question. Like, it's on everybody's mind. Like, how do you get people's attention in an attention economy that is this noisy?
Yeah. Well, I guess a number of things. I mean, I think you have to think about breaking through in a realistic way. And that's in line with what your goals are. Like it's hard, it's harder than ever to break through in a big national way where this is, something that's getting talked about all over. That's just harder now. And, nobody really has the formula for that. There are still some big hits like a national NPR show, Morning Joe, the really big podcasts. Those can kind of break through and give some momentum. But a lot of it is you really have to kind of be in a lot of different places. People are just getting their information from so many different places. So you want to make sure that you're on some podcasts so that people who, listen to podcasts, they can find you there. Some people have like 84 Substacks subscriptions. So make sure you're on Substack. And you really need to think of it in a big way. So it's about those things. It's also at the same time about building your own community. So if you have a newsletter, your own social media, taking any of the attention that you get. So say you get a good review somewhere, making sure you're getting it to your community. So there are no quick fixes, really. I mean, I always think of it sort of like, launching a business. It's not completely different. Nobody If people had a formula for launching a successful business and there's this one thing and all of a sudden everyone's going to be walking into your, business or buying your product, we'd have millions and millions and millions of, very wealthy entrepreneurs, which I guess we do, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
A business, in order to develop a business, you come to work every day and you keep on doing the work and you iterate on what's working and you drop what's not. So I think that's a really important mindset for an author, which I know is not the most exciting thing to hear, but I think a lot of it does come down to doing, consistently doing work. It's in the lead up to publication, absolutely, but then, see what's working, what's resonating. Somebody does one particular podcast with you and this one really brought a lot of readers in, look and see if you can figure out why. Was it a particular way that they positioned it? Was it they tapped into a different audience? What was it? And then try to iterate on that and try to find, try to do more of that. So I think, in this environment, it's really important to be nimble, and watch really closely what is working. And also not to get discouraged, because sometimes you do just have to do a lot and it's hard to exactly see where the interest is coming from, or if anything is even happening, and you kind of have to keep on plugging along till you stumble upon something.
Well, I can say that in my own experience, just as an observer and a consumer of media, like the best I can describe it is to use the word ubiquity. Like when I see a book that's getting a good launch, it will feel for like a week or two, or if it's really lucky, like a month, it will feel ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, if we're being honest, that is tied to a major publisher investing in, a big promotion campaign and like major mainstream media outlets
Mm-hmm.
like gobbling it up and kind of helping with the promotion. So that's like New York Times, NPR, New Yorker, like all the things people know. I will feel like when a book is really taking off, that everywhere I turn, I see it. And that's like the authors everywhere. People are chattering about it. It's on social media. People are taking selfies with it. It just has that kind of like echo chamber quality. And I don't know. I mean, I guess occasionally that will happen with a book that's published on a really tiny indie press. Occasionally it'll happen when an author has no outside publicity help, but that's a rarity. Does that I'm imagining you would say the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a rarity. I mean, it has to be given the number of books that come out every year. I mean, and then now, I mean, there's all the traditional houses, and then there's, the independents, and then lots of self-publishing options. So there's just there's a ton of books, and then on top of that, there's a lot of other things that are vying for people's attention. So yeah, that is definitely the case. It's difficult to do that, but I think, again, going back to what your goals are, and figuring out that space that you can break through. You might not break through on a national level, and but you can break through to the people that you want to break through. So if your goal is, you really want to be, and you want to position yourself for a bunch of festivals and awards, you can think about it. All right, so then what are the spaces that are going to be get your book in front of literary readers and critics. If you are writing nonfiction and you really want to get onto the speaking circuit, okay, like what does that space look like? And you have to just drill down to, like, all right, how do I get to those people that I need to get to? It's not so much about overall numbers necessarily. But it's about the right people, the people that are going to buy your book, the people that are going to invite you to headline a festival, the people that are going to see if you want to come to their speaker series or be on their show. So you have to, in this environment that's so big, you kind of have to figure out where your space is and try to just be successful within that.
And what is worth the time in your estimation? Because there are options here, if somebody's like blogging on LiveJournal, assuming that even still exists, or if they have some blogspot address or something,
Right.
I'm not 100% sure if that's going to be the way to go. I guess it could be, but maybe the utility of that approach might have faded. I'm wondering what you think, like whether it's podcasts or book tours or TikTok, which everybody is talking about,
Mhm.
trying to like become the next darling of book talk
Right.
on your way to like, selling 10 million copies or whatever it is. Like, what do you recommend to authors, both in your stable at Press Shop, but also just authors generally?
Yeah. I mean, I think it really depends on your book. It depends on your skill set. It depends on the topic of your book. There are a lot of authors that have really promoted their books very successfully with something like a Substack, where they have their own subscribers, and it's sort of like it's a newsletter. And some people are great at that and use it to great effect. Other people waste a huge amount of time doing it and nobody reads it, and it's like not doing anything. So I think you
But how
have.
do you, wait, how do you get readers on Substack?
Right.
Like, I mean,
Yeah.
how do you like build an audience there? I guess it's like, I don't understand it well enough. I post a newsletter there, but like, is it
Yeah.
it's a social media site? There is a social
Yeah,
component to it.
there's a social component, definitely. There's, recommending different newsletters. There's word of mouth and promoting it through your other channels. So if you have, a pre-order email list that you put together, which every author should, sort of all the people in their lives, their friends and family and colleagues and former neighbors and people from their MFA program should, you should announce your book to them. You can also announce your Substack to them. If you have social media, you can drive people there. I think whatever the one thing is that you are going to really put your effort into, it ends up being a marketing. You have to do marketing work. So I think I'm a little bit, sometimes format. I wouldn't say format agnostic exactly, but it's all about what you do with it. Email. I email all day long. Email is a great tool. If you send a crappy email to the wrong person, email sucks. It's the same thing with anything. If you're writing a Substack and it's not interesting and you're not writing it in a way that's going to make anyone want to read your book, it's a huge waste of time. And the same goes for social media. So, you do have to make sure that things resonate, that your messaging resonates, that you're being strategic about how you're reaching your audience, and then and then that you sort of do the work. You sort of show up and keep on thinking about how to promote it. Have it as something going on in your head of, oh, like I saw this, I saw this new, book that just came out, and I bet that author has a big platform. Maybe I can see if I like reach out, and if I read their book and like it, I can reach out and see if they want me to interview them, and then maybe they'll promote it. Because that's one thing that is very effective with any sort of promotion, and it's really the grounds for all media relations, is you have to find a way to get in front of other people's audiences that makes sense for you. So if somebody has a big social media audience and you hate social media, you're not on social media, okay, but if they maybe will post about it, great, you got in front of their audience. Same thing for podcasts. And the same thing can go for anything. The Substack, if you do a guest post on someone else's Substack and then say, hey, and I have my own Substack, you can get people there. So you do have to sort of always be looking for, ways to build out your readership. So, I don't think there are any quick fixes that work for everyone. It takes a lot of elbow grease. I mean, it really takes a lot of keeping it in your head. And when you're walking down the street, maybe you think of something, or, it just has to be something that you're sort of chewing on over time and consistently following through on.
I think there are just authors who resist this notion that in addition to being the author of a book, they also have to take on what is in essence like an entirely different and separate job that is requiring like a totally different skills, a much different skill set. And, it requires discipline and talent and tenacity like anything.
Totally.
And I'm just wondering, because when you talk about Substack or you talk about social media, these are numbers games. The media in general, you're trying to access somebody else's audience, but not all audiences are created equal, both in terms of like how niche specific they are and how resonant they might be with whatever you've created. But also, these terms like stickiness and engagement are thrown around because there are certain people who have an audience of whatever size, and that audience is really active and communicative. And like if this person that they are a fan of makes a recommendation, they take it and run with it. And then there are people, and I'm imagining this is like the vast majority, they might even have a big audience. They might have 50,000 or 500,000 followers on Instagram or whatever it is, but they put something up and it's like nothing. Like it really doesn't lead to much. I've heard so many authors bemoan this where they're like, oh my God, I finally got my big break. I got, an interview in whatever publication. And it's like, didn't lead to book sales at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's a relatively common experience for somebody who's just debuting. They might be like, oh, I didn't realize that. I thought when I was young, I thought if you were in the New York Times, it was over. You were a millionaire.
Mm-hmm. Right. No,
but,
totally. And you see New York Times reviews sometimes that don't really do anything. Sometimes reviews will review in the Times. Obviously, there's a prestige factor, but there are definitely some reviews that are, that more of that book reporty type review. Sometimes they don't really do very much. Obviously.
I feel like a really shitty, like mean, but like very well considered review is better.
Totally. I mean, it gets people talking. I mean, for better or worse, it's, it gets people riled up and engagement. But a lot of those things that were sort of surefire ways to book success are just not working anymore. So yeah, I do think, and then sometimes, we were just working on a book a couple months ago. It was called Single at Heart, and it's about people who love to be single. They're single by choice. We did a ton of media for it, and went really well. But one thing that we landed was just a personal essay. We placed one of our personal essays in Huffington Post, and for whatever reason, that one just absolutely took off. We got tons of incoming requests for that. We've placed many things in Huffington Post over the years. That one just took off.
And you can't predict it because it's like the reason it took off is that, okay, it goes up in the Huffington Post, but then readers have to share it. And if you get a reader who has a big audience who shares it, then things can go viral. And I go through this where publishers are like, well, how many people are going to listen to to this episode? And I'm like, it could be 5,000, it could be 100,000. It depends on who
Mhm.
shares what. Like
Right.
it's out of my control. It's the whims of the internet, and I can't even track it. I have no idea, but I'll look at some episodes sometimes, and it'll be with a debut author. In particular, I've had debut authors who don't have any kind of name recognition coming in, and I'll put their episode up and it'll explode. And then I'll also have episodes where the author might have a higher profile and it does well, but it's not like going crazy. And I'm just like, I have no clue what's going on out here anymore.
I mean, it turns out that nobody really knows anymore. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. There's lots of things you can try and lots of things that will work to a certain extent. Nobody really knows besides, having a huge book that everyone's going to be talking about it. For the most part, the publishing industry has changed so much over the past decade or two. Media industry has changed so much over the past decade or two. Over the past year or two, it's absolutely accelerated this change. So, there's nobody that can definitely guarantee this will do that. And if you look at this presidential election, the media campaigns were completely different than any other typical election cycle media campaign. It was so much it leaned incredibly hard on those reaching out to niche audiences and podcasts. So, it is really important to be paying attention to where things are. I think, if you in 2 years, who knows, maybe all of this, everything I'm saying that we're talking about might be totally outdated. It's changing that fast. So I think the best things that you can do is really thinking about, one of the things across campaigns. We work on so many different types of books, and I'm often have tried to think like, all right, what are the similarities? We do different genres, different publishers, different authors at different levels of their career, topics, genre. What are the similarities? What can you say about all campaigns? And I think what it comes down to is there are two different elements to every single book campaign, and that is, what is it? Like, what is your messaging? How are you making people that haven't read your book want to read it? That entire messaging piece is huge. Like, no matter where your book is, you have to have that in place, and then you have to have sort of the media list or the outreach list or the people that you're going to get that material to. And so across every single campaign, those two things really have to be really good. They're going to vary from person to person, book to book, but you have to figure out, like, you can have a good book promotion campaign of any sort if you cannot get people to read your book. You have to give them a reason to read your book. Like, what is the thing what are they going to get from it? What is the story? What is the hook? You have to have that. And then you have to get it to the right people. And if either one of those isn't in place, you can have the best messaging in the world. You're not getting it to the people that need to see it. If you get, sort of a boring presentation of your book to the right person, they're not going to want to do it. So I think, you know, there are so many nuances and personal prescriptions for different authors, but if you need a sort of grand framework, that would be it, I would say.
Yeah, it's making me think like scientifically about like promotion and publicity and the media environment that we live in. And I'm wondering, like, is there a number? I'm sure nobody has been able to locate this, but just theoretically, if there is a number of people, like a number of eyeballs that anything would need to reach in order to arrive at some kind of tipping point. So like if you're trying to sell a book, I get that, like, you can have a review in the New York Times. It could be positive even, and that might not lead to any sales. And, you could do an interview on and, with Terry Gross, and maybe that sells a few, but not like what you were, hoping for. But is there a number? Like if you are presented or your book is presented to like 10 million people, are you guaranteed a certain number of sales? I don't know if you are.
I don't think you are, because it's just, what are the is it the right kind of eyeballs? Like people that are going to buy books. Those aren't always the same thing. Some people don't buy books. They might look at things about books. They might read interviews, but they don't buy books. So those eyeballs don't lead to sales. Some eyeballs are just, it's
Illiterate.
coming across yeah. Some of them are illiterate. Some of them, it sounds amazing, but they're just so busy they don't even have time to let it, get into their conscious because there's another tweet that distracted them. So I think it's really hard to give a number.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like there is something I have often said almost mystical about the process of a book taking off, because I feel like books that do oftentimes like meet their moment, like just with like the perfect timing. Like there'll be a book that hits the marketplace just when there's something on everybody's mind that this book is somehow connected to or speaks to.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it kind of has this like fairy dust sprinkled on it, and it
Mm-hmm.
just kind of takes off in that way. But I think like, banking on that is a losing bet, because it's impossible to game that. That just sort of happens for somebody or it doesn't. But
So sorry, I was just going to say that one book that we worked on that did, I would say sort of falls into that category. And I know that you had him on was I Hate the Internet by Jared Kovac. So that
I
was,
still hate the internet,
yeah,
just in case you were wondering.
we should all hate the internet, really. So that was a book that had just unbelievable success. Like it was it was published by his own publishing house, but it was the first book at his own publishing house. So that's a tough sell. But that was one of those books that just took off. Like you got some stuff in Salon and a bunch of different places. And then Dwight Garner at the Times gave it a review that moved books because Dwight Garner's, he's a fun read and he had so much fun with this book. And then that just completely took off. He had, foreign rights were snatched up all over the place. He got a big agent, a contract for his next book. People were talking about it. So that was an example of that. I think it really hit at the right moment. It was very funny. I think that really helps. It's hard to argue with laughter. It's the kind of book where, I don't know if you remember, but I mean, you read the first page and you're laughing out loud.
Well, and it's also a book that I mean, I remember talking to Jared about this. The title of the book, I Hate the Internet, captures something. Like it's like the most obvious thing in the world, but the title says it, and people respond. Most people just like laugh and nod or whatever. And I think too that he would fall into the camp. I've talked to a lot of authors over the years, and I think he's close to the top of the list in terms of authors who have a gift for self-promotion. Like he's got the ability to communicate and create intrigue, and he's very smart and has a nice dry sense of humor and all this kind of stuff. But I just, was impressed, because I want to say he might have employed that like, convoluted strategy I was describing earlier, where you pretend to be the publicist, or maybe it was you. I know you worked on it, but I mean, I think it was like when I got to
Leah Paulos. It wasn't him. It was me.
I'm like not able to remember, but I think it was just the idea. Like I didn't realize that the book was self-published. And I think the Dwight Garner interview,
I don't think he did either.
I mean, yeah, I think that people, if they know, and that's a good lesson, because if people know that a book is self-published, it automatically drops down. And that includes me, if I'm being, it's because
totally
not because like, these publishing houses are the end all be all, but it's just like an insurance policy. It's like, okay, this has been vetted.
Yeah. 100%.
And I remember being like, wow, that's a savvy person who got a Dwight Garner review publishing his own book. And that is also a credit to you. You deserve a little bit of kudos for this, because, right? It doesn't happen without you.
Yeah, no, that we did pitch him again.
And it worked.
It worked. I mean, I, was not super hopeful because, again, it was pretty much self-published. But, I sort of, back to the point I said earlier, is just doesn't hurt to try. There's really no downside. I mean, you don't want to harass a journalist with something stupid, but, I was like, okay, New York Times, I know New York Times doesn't review self-published books. This isn't totally self-published. And so it worked out. And the worst thing that could have happened is it didn't work out, which, it already wasn't working out. He wasn't going to review it if we didn't email. So
Right.
you might as well try.
So when somebody is in the like acquisition phase, or their book has recently been acquired and they're kind of ramping up, like on that long ramp towards publication, what is the like a good set of expectations to have as an author? I mean, I guess like we'll confine this conversation to like one of the big five publishers. Like you get
Mhm.
like a deal with a Random House or one of its imprints, or you are at FSG or something. You get one of these great book deals. Like what typically can an author expect? And I think there's a lot of variability within these entities. It,
Mhm.
it sort of depends on what they
Right.
paid for it, right?
Yeah. So what can they expect from the publisher?
Public,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it definitely varies. It varies according to publisher, imprint, particular publicist, what else is in their catalog for what other books they're promoting and how many other books they're promoting. If, like you said, they got a big advance and it's a priority, then those books get more attention. There's no doubt about it. Um, so, I mean, they'll almost always be reaching out to the trades. They'll, the Kirkuses, PW, Library Journal, Shelf Awareness, etc. Usually it's like a list of maybe 60 to 100 people on an e-blast. And those are the major book review places that are still around, as well as maybe some national NPR, some big podcasts, and then so and then I would say after that there's a lot of variation. For a big book, they can put a lot. One publicist will spend a lot of their day for however many months, or a decent number of hours a week on promoting this book, and it does tend to be about their priorities as a company, though, as the publisher. Like, they need to make sure that their books do well, and they have determined that this one that they paid a lot of money for is their best chance. So unfortunately, for the ones that are coming out at that same time, sometimes they get shafted a bit. There's a real hours in the day problem in all sorts of elements. I mean, editorial, marketing, publicity. They don't have enough time to do all the work that they, ideally would be able to. So I think,
Enter like press shop. I mean,
yeah,
that's why I think freelance publicists
yeah,
or like external publicity outfits are needed, and it's a luxury because authors have to be able to afford
right,
to do it. But yeah, that was my experience at
yeah,
Simon and Schuster, where I think and I was new, so I didn't realize the situation. But everybody was nice. Everybody was working hard, but not nearly enough got done because there were like a million other projects, and
yeah, yeah,
it's just
absolutely.
it's a tough
So
situation.
I think no matter what, authors, and this was actually a big part of why we started Book Publicity School, is a press shop, we can only take a certain number of books. So, and I also want to work with a lot of books where people don't have the budget. And so that was sort of something I've been thinking about for a long time, is like, how can we support just a wider range of authors that don't have the budget to hire somebody for a full campaign. So what we came up with is, sort of answering the problem that, or trying to find a solution to the following problem. Publishers, because they have this issue, require authors to do so much work to promote their books. And a lot of authors have no idea how to do it, because basically you're asking them to advocate for their work, which in this space between the publishing business and the media space, both of which are very opaque, kind of intimidating worlds that have their own protocols. And an author is kind of thrown into that and are like, okay, we need you to do a lot of promotion, get a website, do social media, make sure you send out a pre-order email, all of these things. And a lot of authors have no idea how to do it. So I think that's what we're trying to do with workshops, is, sharing with authors what is feasible, what these worlds look like, because how can anybody be effective if you don't understand the world? You kind of have to understand how it works and what's needed. And it's Also, there's a lot of online resources. I mean, you can look up book publicity, DIY, book promotion. And one of the problems is it's just really hard to wade through so much information.
That's right.
It's there's tons. You could listen for 4 months straight to every podcast about this stuff. And so being able to guide authors, like, okay, you know what, this piece is probably not relevant for you. Don't even pay any attention to that. Because this is your platform and this is your genre, you should probably focus here. And this is what you need to do that. So that's been it's been really gratifying, and to be able to work with a much bigger range of authors.
So I save social media for last because I have a very complicated relationship with social media. I don't love it, but it feels like a necessity that a lot of us are sort of bound to if we're trying to make a podcast, for example, or run a business of any kind. You kind of need at least some presence on social media. And I think the same goes for an author, because an author is trying to build a little business of their own, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sell books. And there are some authors who have the gift. They are so good at social media, and everything they say, gets a million likes and retweets or whatever it is. But I think most authors are just like sort of sitting there with their 800 followers, which is not nothing, but it's like, it's not going to move the needle. And I'm just curious, like, are there best practices? Are there things that writers should be considering that they aren't already considering when it comes to social?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing is that, depending on where you are, if you have something on Threads, and then maybe you also have your Facebook and LinkedIn, but you're not that active. I mean, one part in this environment where even social media is really fractured now, because, Twitter used to be really fantastic for the book world and the literary community. Yeah, still has a lot of good stuff, but a lot of people have left. You have to wade through a lot of crap. So, it does sort of require you to spread your energy a little bit. So I always suggest to authors that, if they have, say, 800 people, like you said, on X, but don't discount that you also have another set of a community in LinkedIn, and you have other people on this platform, and maybe and you want to just broaden your tent, sort of all the different people that you can get to be interested in your book. I think in terms of how to grow a particular social media platform, there aren't really any, as far as I've seen, that there are any hard and fast rules, besides you have to be engaged, and it takes time. Like, you have to be part of the community. You have to be very fluent in the language of that platform. You have to be engaging with other people, and you have to be doing it consistently, and you have to be providing value. So whether it's just fantastic insights or really funny observations, that has to be there. People don't want, everyone is inundated with options for how to spend the next 3 seconds of their consciousness. So it has to be good. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. So, it's not, I don't think there are any really quick fixes, except for trying to hone in on what your voice, what you're saying, what you're providing to the people in that space, and being a part of that community. I've never seen anybody have a successful social media presence who didn't spend a huge amount of time on social media.
That's what's so frustrating, though, because it's like you say, even social media is now fractalized.
Yeah.
So it's like, are you on X? Are you on Threads? Are you on Instagram? Are you on this? Are you on that? Are you on Bluesky? And I'm like, I'm trying to keep up, but I'm like, I don't want to spend 3 hours a day posting on social media. I have no desire.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it can feel like if you're not, you're making some kind of, huge, like, self-inflicted error.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating. Like, do you think, like, it's okay to just, like, pick your favorite one or two and, like, just do that?
Yeah, I think picking your favorite one or two is a good idea. You have to be realistic. Like, we all, need to eat and sleep and, have some other stuff going on in our lives. So you have to. I would say that if you do have more than that, at least have, if you have a website is great for an author, because it's a place where you can lead people back to. So even if you're not really active on a particular website, if you have your sort of profile page, maybe a little bit of content, you still have your website there, so that maybe if you're on a podcast, they can tag you there and readers can find you, and they're led directly to your website. Your website is one spot that you control on the media. It's a piece of real estate that you own. You're not just using it at the pleasure of Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. That's yours. You can put the narrative of your work forward in any way you want there. So do that. I think every author should do that. And then, at minimum, your social media can point people there. And it gives readers, no matter where they are, if they find you on, they see you at a bookstore and maybe they're just look at Threads all the time and they look you up. All right, maybe they find you there. It's not much going on, but your website is there. So, you just, the answer to social media is really, it depends on your interest, aptitude. You have to enjoy it, because if you don't, it's torture. You have to spend, you don't have to enjoy every minute of it, but I have never seen somebody be successful on social media, not only spending a lot of time, but actually getting into it, because you have to. Otherwise, you're not going to have, if you just try and drop in and like leave the best post and just sit back and wait for the, likes to roll in, maybe that works. But really, for consistently, you just have to be part of that community.
Yeah, you have to treat it like it's another job. It's another job on
I
top
mean,
of the other
we don't have
jobs.
time for all these jobs. I know it's very, it's hard.
But it's the reality. It's
Yeah.
like that's the reality of it, is that you have to find a way. And some people do, and I think there is an echelon of writers, and it's a very small group, who sell a ton of books and don't need social media. And so they kind of eschew it. And I feel like that's a flex. It's like, I'm not on. Oh, you're not on social media with the proletariat. Like
Right.
you're in your castle, with a pure mind. But the rest of us have to,
Yes, that is a true mark of success now.
That's right. That's right. I feel like there was a moment too in the media culture where like male media figures growing beards, like that was also a flex, where it was like, yeah, I don't give a fuck anymore. I've got a beard. You remember?
Right.
Like David Letterman, I grew that beard, and then Jon Stewart grew a beard. I'm like, I guess that's what you do.
Right.
You're like, yeah, I don't care. I'm rich.
Once you reach a certain level of success,
Yeah.
scraggly facial hair.
Is there anything that I did not ask you about that I should have asked you about? Do you have anything in closing that we should cover?
God, I feel like we covered a lot of ground. I don't want to close with a really boring thing to say, but I will. You did mention spreadsheets before, and there is no book promotion campaign that has ever been successful that I've seen that it does not stand on a good, big, fat spreadsheet. And that every author should have one for themselves, so that, they can capture ideas and contacts and ideas. It's really important. There's no way, all of the stuff we've been talking about, where you need to be doing this and you need to be reaching out to these people in this whole job situation. And I think you have to kind of treat it like a project. Like you have to be a little bit of a project manager, and you need a spreadsheet to keep that all in place, because the work of book promotion, again, there is a lot of like in the weeds groundwork. So that's not like the most inspiring note to end on. Like,
no, but it is a very useful note to end on, because this is practical stuff, but it makes a big difference. And I'm just thinking of like keeping track of everybody that you've emailed.
Yeah.
Like if you don't have a spreadsheet going, like keeping track of your correspondence, like I guess you can look in your email and like dig through it, but it gets very easy for these kinds of processes to become unwieldy. And, even even the person with the best memory can easily get to feeling scatterbrained about it. So, having a spreadsheet for what, like, who are you reaching out to, which podcasts, which magazines, which newspapers, which journalists, which other authors, you know what I'm saying? Like you've got to have something
different categories for like local. So like, don't ignore local press. Like maybe if you live in Indianapolis, like Okay, maybe the local paper will do.
Which I once did, by the way.
You did.
Part of
Okay.
part of my childhood was
All
spent
right.
in
So then
Indianapolis.
you could help that person populate that page of their media list with Indianapolis targets. But you want to sort of have a lot of different sheets. For each one is categorized by what you're going to send to them, which doesn't mean it needs to be a mass email, but the people that are in Indianapolis, you're going to say like, hey, I was like born in Indianapolis, I live here, I'm active in this Indianapolis writers community, whatever it is, to all of these people in some format. So I mean, that's one thing. Another thing that you should put in that sheet is, and I see authors do this all the time, you really want to make sure to let the people in your life know about your book. So maybe it's a pre-order email, maybe it's right at publication. I see authors all the time saying like, oh yeah, I have to do it. I'm going to look through my contact list tonight. And that just leads to a really diminished list. You want to just think really broadly about that and start that list early, because then you'll, think of somebody you're in the shower. You're like, oh, what about Bobby I met at my kid's birthday party? He said he was interested in that. Let me throw him on there. Those lists, that kind of personal email tends to go far. Those people who know you, they're like, oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that she wrote a novel. I'm going to buy it. And then I know her, so maybe I'll review it. So really think broadly about that. Like, don't leave that to the last minute. Think about all the people, like who was, with you in this, hiking group. It's not saying that people that are completely uninterested you would want to necessarily include, but if you think about the people that are, make sure to include them.
Leah Paulos, I think this is the first time in the history of this show that the climactic closing sequence of one of these interviews centered on spreadsheets. But I mean, I'm as shocked as anybody. That was an outstanding.
I'm a fun person. That is not the most. You might not be able to tell from that last bit of wisdom I shared, but I want to be useful.
Listen, don't underestimate yourself. I think people are I think people out there are electrified, and I'll say again, that's like something that they will take away. So it's a good way to close. That's the kind of thing that would help me. It's like, oh yeah, do a spreadsheet. Yeah, duh. Of course you should do a spreadsheet.
Right. I feel like I should find a way to bring it up earlier though, so it doesn't need to be my closing insight.
It's like your encore, an encore with spreadsheets. But it has been an illuminating and informative conversation about a part of the publication process that can feel mysterious and frustrating. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, there we have it. That was today's conversation with Leah Paulos, founder of Press Shop PR and Book Publicity School. A great conversation about how to launch a book. To learn more about Leah and what she's up to, visit pressshoppr.com or bookpublicityschool.com, or just go to both of them. You have options. You can follow Leah and her activities at Press Shop and Book Publicity School on social media. She's on LinkedIn, Bluesky, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, that was Leah Paulos, founder of Press Shop PR and Book Publicity School. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. Hit the subscribe button. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, TikTok, Instagram, and Bluesky. I would love it if you would sign up for my weekly newsletter over at Substack, and I would love it if you would join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. To get an Otherppl t-shirt or to join my book club, head on over to the show's official website, otherppl.com. And if you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out, do me a quick favor. Please give this show a rating wherever you listen. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever it is. Rate the show, write a little review if that's an option. It helps the show find new listeners. Last but not least, I have some books out. My latest book is a novel. It's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. Available in trade paperback, ebook, and audiobook editions. I narrate the audiobook, so if that sounds appealing, check it out. It's my book. It's a novel, It's called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. All right, so coming up on Thursday, I will hopefully be back with Mira Gonzalez for another episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, a Thanksgiving episode. Mira has been dealing with some family stuff and could not make it to the microphone last week. So hopefully things will be better next week. It's sort of touch and go, but stay tuned, right? It'll be a surprise.